Poverty does not only live in a bank account, it lives in something older, something deeper, something that the numbers merely reflect. A person can change their income, move to a new city, find a new opportunity, and still carry inside them the invisible agreement that quietly recreates everything they left behind. The account is not the source of the poverty. The account is the evidence of what the inner state has been permitted to become. And that is the truth that most financial teaching never reaches, because most financial teaching never goes deep enough. Wallace Wattles, the man who gave the world the certain way, taught something that modern prosperity culture has largely forgotten. He taught that there is a mental state, a sustained inner orientation, a way of thinking and expecting and acting from which continued poverty becomes not merely unlikely, but structurally impossible. Not harder, not less frequent, impossible. Because when the inner state no longer agrees with poverty, when the thought, the faith, the word, the action, and the identity all withdraw their cooperation from lack, poverty loses the only home it ever truly had. That is what this teaching is about. Think about the language that has become natural to you. Think about the phrases that come without effort, the ones you say so quickly that you no longer even hear them. People like me do not win that kind of thing. Money never seems to stay with me no matter what I do. Life is always going to be hard for someone like me. I should not want too much. I cannot afford to think that way. These are not just sentences. These are agreements. They are permissions written in the language of daily speech, and every time they are spoken without resistance, they become a little more like law inside you. Poverty has not merely touched your circumstances, it has become your vocabulary. And the frightening thing is not that these phrases feel honest. The frightening thing is that they feel reasonable. They feel like an accurate reading of experience. You have seen the numbers. You have lived the limitation. You have watched attempts fall short again and again. And so the internal conclusion forms naturally, quietly, almost compassionately. This is simply how life is for a person like me. Familiarity becomes expectation. And once expectation is established, it is no longer just a thought. It is a filter. Every new situation is passed through it, and every new situation comes out confirming what was already believed, because the state inside is doing the interpreting. What Wattles understood, and what you must understand right now before another day passes, is that this cycle is not fate. It is not destiny. It is not the judgment of the source upon your life. It is a cycle, which means it has a mechanism, which means the mechanism can be interrupted. Poverty became familiar. Familiarity became expectation. Expectation shaped action. Action recreated the condition. The condition confirmed the belief, and the belief deepened the state. This is not a sealed door, this is a loop, and loops have entry points. The question is where your entry point is, and whether you are willing to step through it. Wallace Wattles did not write about prosperity as a philosophical luxury for those who were already comfortable. He wrote for people who were genuinely hungry, genuinely limited, genuinely trapped inside visible conditions that appeared to leave no exit. His book, his teachings, his entire life's work were aimed at one central claim: that there is a certain way of thinking, being, and acting from which prosperity is a natural and inevitable result. Not an occasional result, not a possible result, a natural one. And the inverse of that claim is what this teaching will spend the next hour walking you through. If there is a certain way that produces wealth, there is also a certain inner state that sustains poverty. And it can be found, named, and refused. The teaching you are about to receive is not about pretending that money is already present. It is not about performing enthusiasm while denying the reality of a difficult situation. Wattles never asked for that kind of self-deception, and neither does this channel. What this teaching is about is something far more honest and far more powerful. It is about removing the inner agreement, the quiet internal permission, the invisible welcome mat that keeps lack not just visiting but residing. You are not going to be asked to ignore your circumstances. You are going to be asked to stop internally agreeing with them as your permanent identity. By the end of this teaching, you will understand how the poverty state operates beneath visible life, why it persists even through genuine effort, and what the specific mental and spiritual shift is that makes its continued existence not just unlikely, but structurally unsustainable. Wattles called this the certain way. Today, you will begin to understand why certainty is the right word for it. Because when every layer of the self, thought, speech, expectation, action, and identity stops cooperating with poverty, poverty cannot sustain itself. It has lost its foundation, and a structure without a foundation does not gradually weaken, it falls. The visible world is powerful in the way that all mirrors are powerful. It shows you what has been. It reflects the accumulated result of 1,000 prior inner states, prior decisions, prior agreements, prior speech. And when you look into it long enough, you begin to mistake the reflection for the truth. You see debt, and your first internal movement is not toward the source of supply. It is toward an identity. You say, I am poor. Not, I have a current financial condition. Not, there is a challenge present. You say, I am. And the moment those two words are connected, the condition stops being something you are moving through and becomes something you are. You see a low income, and instead of reading it as a channel that has not yet been fully opened, you read it as evidence of category. This is who I am. This is the tier to which I belong. There is a ceiling built into my story, and the numbers are simply confirming where that ceiling is. You do not look at the income and ask what inner state produced it and what inner state could expand it. You look at the income and let it name you. This is the trap, not the income itself, the identity transaction that happens when you look at it. The visible condition becomes the verdict. Then there is the family history. You look back and see a lineage of struggle. Grandparents who never had enough. Parents who worked hard and still came short. A pattern that stretches back further than your own memory can reach. And the conclusion that forms is not, I am the one who breaks this. The conclusion is, this is my inheritance, not a spiritual inheritance of dominion and supply and the image of the source, a material inheritance of limitation. And you begin to carry it not as a challenge to overcome, but as a heritage to honor. Because to reject it feels somehow like a betrayal of the people who lived it. You look at past failures and give them a name that is larger than they deserve. They become a pattern, not an event, not a set of decisions made from a particular state of mind. A pattern. And patterns feel permanent. They feel like personality. They feel like the shape of your life written in invisible ink before you were born. Every failed attempt becomes evidence for the pattern. Every disappointment is filed under the label. And the label grows heavier with each deposit until you no longer ask whether it is accurate. You simply bow beneath its weight and call the bowing acceptance. Something else happens in the presence of visible wealth. You see people who have more, and instead of reading their abundance as evidence that the source distributes freely and that you are equally eligible for supply, you read it as evidence of your own separation from that category. You feel the distance. They are over there, you are over here. And the distance becomes a kind of identity wall. You do not experience them as fellow human beings who have found a particular alignment with increase. You experience them as proof of how far you are from where you want to be. The separation feels real. It is not. But the feeling creates behavior, and the behavior creates distance, and the distance confirms the feeling. Because the desire still exists underneath all of this. Because the hunger for better is still alive. The poverty-trained mind develops a coping strategy. It shrinks the desire. It tells itself that wanting less is the same as being wise. It calls the reduction in expectation a form of gratitude or contentment. But it is not gratitude. Gratitude is a form of wealth consciousness, a recognition that supply is active and flowing. What this is something closer to a preemptive surrender. If I do not want it, I cannot be hurt when I do not receive it. The desire is not released to the source. It is extinguished in the mind, and the source cannot deliver to an address where the occupant has removed their name from the door. There is a phrase that sounds noble and actually functions as a poverty seal. That phrase is calling smallness humility. The teaching of true spiritual humility has nothing to do with suppressing your desire for increase, apologizing for wanting supply, or performing modesty about your capacity to receive from the infinite. Humility before the source means recognizing that you are not the generator of supply. It means trusting the source as the origin. It means releasing the how to a wisdom greater than your planning mind. It does not mean agreeing that you deserve less than the full life. It does not mean declining delivery from the universe in order to appear appropriately modest. Smallness is not a spiritual virtue. It is a poverty agreement wearing spiritual clothing. Visible lack eventually becomes internal agreement. This is the final and most dangerous step in the trap. What begins as an external condition becomes an inner position. The numbers outside create a story inside. The story inside creates a behavior. The behavior reproduces the numbers, and the numbers are then read as confirmation. The visible world looks like a cause. It is actually a consequence. And as long as you continue to read the consequence as the cause, you will continue to produce the same consequence, no matter what surface-level changes you attempt to make. The trap is not made of circumstances. It is made of interpretation. And interpretation is the one thing in this entire equation that you have the authority to change. There is a declaration that functions as an act of refusal. Not a wish, not a hope. A refusal. When you say it and mean it, even partially, even as a beginning, you are withdrawing the internal welcome that poverty has been given. You are beginning to revoke the agreement. Right now, in the comments, write these words: poverty cannot remain in me. Not, poverty will probably decrease. Not, I am working on my finances. Write the refusal. Write it as one who understands that poverty is not only a condition in the world, but a condition in the self, and that the self has the authority to stop hosting it. Comment now: poverty cannot remain in me. That comment is not a performance for the algorithm. It is an act of internal reorientation. When you write those words, you are doing something that your habitual thoughts have rarely allowed you to do. You are refusing agreement. You are placing the declaration before the evidence instead of waiting for the evidence before the declaration. This is exactly the movement that Wattles described when he spoke of thinking in the certain way. The certain way does not wait for visible proof before affirming invisible truth. It affirms invisible truth as the cause that will produce the visible evidence. Comment now and begin the movement. The most immediate emotional cost of poverty identity is what it does to your pricing. You look at what you offer, the skill, the time, the knowledge, the care, the craft, and then poverty identity steps in before you can name its true value. And what poverty identity produces is a number that is not based on the actual value of the exchange. It is based on what a person like you is allowed to charge. It is a preemptive apology for your own worth, made in dollar amounts before the client even arrives. Undercharging is not modesty. It is not service. It is poverty identity expressing itself through the most concrete language of exchange that exists. It is lack agreeing with itself. The second cost is hidden talent. You have something to offer that the world has not yet seen, not because the world has rejected it, but because the poverty-trained self will not bring it forward. It hides the gift before anyone has the chance to reject it, because poverty identity has already delivered the rejection in advance. The answer is no before the question is asked. The door is closed before the knock, and you tell yourself that you are being realistic, that you are protecting yourself from disappointment. But what you are actually doing is ensuring that the disappointment you fear is the only outcome available. Hidden talent is a poverty agreement made with the future. Asking. The simple, direct human act of asking for what you need, asking for the right price, asking for the opportunity, asking for the help that is sitting nearby and ready to be given. Poverty identity makes asking feel dangerous. It makes asking feel like exposure. If you ask and the answer is no, then the internal poverty verdict has been confirmed out loud in front of witnesses. So the poverty-trained mind avoids asking. It goes without rather than risk confirmation of its worst belief about itself. And in going without, it recreates the very condition it was trying to protect itself from. The avoidance of asking is one of the most expensive behaviors that poverty identity produces. Opportunity arrives in many forms, and not all of them look familiar. Some opportunities arrive as invitations to rooms you have never entered. Some arrive as collaborations with people who operate at a level that feels uncomfortable to your current identity. Some arrive as offers that seem larger than what you have been used to receiving. Poverty identity responds to all of these with fear, not analysis, not discernment, fear. The fear that says, this is not for me, this is above me, this will not work for me, I will embarrass myself, I will fail, I will be exposed. The fear looks like wisdom. It presents itself as caution. But it is poverty identity defending its border against the increase that would dissolve it. There are rooms in life that correspond to higher levels of receiving, higher quality of connection, higher standards of operation, and higher proximity to the channels through which increase flows. Poverty identity keeps you out of those rooms, not through locked doors, but through the internal story that says you do not belong there. And the tragedy is that the story is so compelling, so deeply woven into the fabric of how you see yourself, that you rarely even approach the door. You disqualify yourself at a distance. You decline the invitation before it is extended. You pre-reject yourself so efficiently that no external rejection is even required, and then you take the absence of invitation as proof that you were right. Increase, when it comes, can be sabotaged, not deliberately, not consciously. Poverty identity undermines increase the way a cold climate undermines a warm weather seed. The mechanism is largely invisible. You receive more, and something in you becomes uncomfortable with the expansion. It associates the discomfort with danger. It begins looking for the familiar. It spends what should be invested. It creates conflict where peace would allow growth. It finds reasons why the increase is temporary or undeserved. It dismantles what was built, not out of malice, but out of a deep internal drive to return to the familiar climate of the state it has always known. Sabotage is not a character flaw. It is poverty identity doing what identity always does, reproducing itself. Guilt around desire is one of the quieter poverty costs, but it is pervasive and persistent. You feel the desire for more, and immediately a second voice enters. Who do you think you are to want that? What gives you the right to expect that level of life? Is it not enough that you have what you have? Should you not be grateful for the little that is present rather than reaching for what is not? And the desire, which was actually a natural movement toward increase, toward the fuller expression of the life you were given, gets buried under the weight of guilt. Desire is not greed. In the teaching of Wattles, desire is the impulse of the source moving through you toward fuller expression. Suppressing it is not spiritual. It is a poverty agreement dressed in religious language. Resentment of wealth is both a symptom and a reinforcement of poverty identity. When you see abundance in another person and your inner response is resentment, suspicion, or contempt, you are doing two things simultaneously. You are confirming your internal belief that wealth and corruption are naturally associated, and you are closing the energetic channel through which you might receive the same increase. You cannot draw to yourself what you have judged as morally inferior. The resentment feels justified because poverty identity always has evidence for its positions, but the evidence is being selected, curated, and interpreted by a state that needs to confirm itself. Not every wealthy person is corrupt. Not every comfortable person is guilty. And your resentment is not a moral stance. It is a poverty agreement wearing the clothing of righteous anger. Struggle becomes normalized. It becomes the expected texture of daily life. You stop noticing how heavy it is because it has been the consistent weight for so long. And in that normalization, something deeply dangerous happens. The contrast disappears. The contrast between the life that is and the life that could be begins to fade. And when the contrast fades, so does the motivation to move. You stop pushing against the weight because the weight has become the floor. You are not resting on a foundation. You are calling the ceiling your sky. Normalizing struggle is not strength, it is not humility. It is the final stage of poverty identity, the point at which lack has been so completely internalized that it no longer even registers as a problem to be solved. The most spiritually disorienting cost of poverty identity is the belief that lack is a form of moral purity, that wanting more means wanting too much, that receiving freely means taking from others, that prosperity is a sign of spiritual shallowness, while struggle is a mark of spiritual depth. This belief does not come from the teachings of any genuine spiritual master. It comes from poverty identity, seeking philosophical justification for its own continued presence. Wattles addressed this directly and firmly. He taught that the source is not honored by your poverty. The source is honored by your full, creative, abundant expression of the life you were given. Treating lack as moral purity is not holiness. It is a poverty agreement sealed with sacred language, and it is among the most resistant forms that this agreement takes. Wallace Wattles did not describe wealth as a reward for the deserving or a gift distributed to the fortunate. He described it as the natural outcome of a particular way of thinking, being, and acting, a way so precise and consistent that he named it the certain way. Certainty was not casual confidence in his framework. Certainty was a specific spiritual posture toward the source and toward increase. It was the posture of someone who has established internally that supply is real, that the source is active, that increase is natural, and that the outer life will eventually conform to the inner state. Poverty, in Wattles's framework, is not primarily a financial crisis. It is primarily a crisis of inner state. Poverty consciousness is sustained by poverty consciousness. This sounds simple, but its implications are sweeping. It means that the conditions around you are not the cause of the poverty state. They are the current output of a poverty state that has been operating beneath the surface. When you approach the circumstances as the cause and spend all your energy trying to change the visible conditions without addressing the state that generated them, you are solving the symptom while leaving the disease untouched. The circumstances may shift temporarily, but the inner state is a generative force, and it continues generating. New channels close, old patterns resurface. The altered circumstance gradually returns to the shape of the state that produced it. Wealth, in the certain way, begins with a new relationship to the source, not a new strategy, not a new hustle, a new relationship, a relationship of trust rather than fear, a relationship of receiving rather than desperately seeking, a relationship in which you no longer approach the source as someone hoping to be noticed or someone trying to earn favor through suffering, but as someone who understands that the source is infinite supply and that the only barrier between you and that supply is the quality of your internal agreement with it. Changing the relationship changes the state. Changing the state changes what the state produces. This is not mystical language for its own sake. This is the operating mechanism of the certain way described plainly. The viewer who wants to apply this teaching must begin to think from abundance rather than toward it. There is an enormous difference between these two orientations. Thinking toward abundance means treating increase as a distant destination that you are hoping to reach from your current position of lack. It keeps the sense of distance active. It keeps the gap in view. Every thought of what you want carries a companion, thought of what you do not yet have. Thinking from abundance means orienting from a state in which the supply is already acknowledged as real, as available, as active. It does not deny current visible conditions. It refuses to let current visible conditions define the state from which you are operating. The source is not the visible channel. The source is infinite, and the infinite does not require your circumstances to change before it can supply you. Acting from increase means that the behavior expresses the new identity before the new identity has been confirmed by the numbers. It means pricing from worth rather than from fear. It means making the offer rather than hiding the gift. It means entering the better room rather than waiting for an engraved invitation. It means organizing your financial life with dignity rather than shame. Wattles was clear that action was not optional in the certain way. The state must be followed by efficient action, but the nature of the action is transformed by the state from which it originates. Action from poverty identity is fearful, apologetic, and easily defeated. Action from the new state is purposeful, expectant, and aligned. One of the most consistent instructions in Wattles' teaching is the instruction to stop mentally dwelling on lack. This is not a request to deny visible reality. It is a recognition that what the mind dwells on becomes the lens through which all incoming information is filtered. If the mind dwells consistently on lack, it will notice lack everywhere. It will find evidence of limitation in neutral circumstances. It will interpret ambiguity in the direction of shortage. It will miss channels that are actually open because the mental attention is focused on what is closed. Dwelling on lack is not realism. It is a training exercise that produces a specific perceptual skill, the skill of finding confirmation for the poverty state in every environment. It is a skill that can be unlearned. Wattles was explicit about competition. He taught that the certain way is not built on a competitive model of wealth, in which one person's gain requires another person's loss. It is built on a creative model, in which the person operating in the certain way adds new value to the world and receives in alignment with the value given. The poverty consciousness version of financial thinking is deeply competitive. It sees the economy as a fixed pie. It sees other people's success as a threat. It sees increase as something that must be seized rather than created. This competitive posture produces anxiety, resentment, and a scarcity of both action and spirit. The certain way produces neither. It produces a clear creative purpose and a confident expectation of receiving from the infinite supply. The person who has entered the certain way does not carry the feeling of being behind. They do not experience other people's prosperity as a rebuke to their own current condition. They live as one who is moving toward increase, not as one who is waiting to be released from lack. This distinction is not cosmetic. It produces fundamentally different behaviors at every level of daily life. The one who is moving toward increase brings effort to their work that the one trapped in lack consciousness cannot access. They bring courage to their choices. They bring gratitude to their present condition, not because the present condition is everything they desire, but because gratitude is the acknowledgement that supply is flowing and that they are part of its movement. This is the certain way. And it begins not with a method, but with a state. There is a belief that poverty is working hard to protect. It is the belief that poverty is proof of who you are, not proof of what you have experienced, not proof of the decisions that were made from a particular state of mind, not proof of the channels that have not yet opened, proof of identity, proof of category, proof of a permanent and fundamental limitation located inside the self, at the level of character or worthiness or destiny. This belief is the engine of the poverty agreement. As long as it operates, every new attempt at increase is undermined before it can develop. The belief is patient. It can allow small surface changes while holding the deeper identity in place. Poverty wants to become your name, not just a label someone once applied from the outside. Your name. The word you think of when you think of yourself in relation to money, supply, opportunity, and the world of increase. And the process by which it becomes your name is so gradual, so incremental, so woven into the language of daily life and daily evidence that most people are not aware it has happened. They discover it only when they notice that they have stopped trying to change their financial life, not because they have given up in despair, but because somewhere beneath the surface they have already decided that this is simply who they are. Poverty has completed its migration from circumstance to name. Do not let a temporary condition become a permanent identity. This is the core disruption of the certain way. The condition is temporary. It is the current output of a state. Change the state, and the output begins to change. The output does not change instantly because states have been in place for years, and the outer world reflects accumulated history. But the direction of movement changes the moment the state changes. And direction is more important than current position. A person who is poor and moving toward the certain way is in a fundamentally different situation than a person who is poor and deepening their agreement with poverty. The numbers may look the same today. The trajectory is completely different. The state changes before the scenery does. This is the law you must accept if you are going to do the work of breaking the poverty agreement. You will be asked to change the inner state while the outer scenery still shows lack. This will feel wrong. It will feel premature. It will feel like a form of delusion. Every visible thing around you may be screaming that the numbers have not changed, that the channels have not opened, that the proof is still absent. But the law is clear. The state is the cause. The scenery is the effect. You cannot wait for the effect to change before you change the cause. You must change the cause and then wait, with faith, for the effect to follow. This is not easy, it is the certain way. Recontextualization is the tool that makes this disruption possible. You look at your current financial condition, and instead of reading it as proof of who you are, you read it as the current output of a past state. The past state is already in the process of changing. The output will follow. When you look at a low income and think this is my category, you are doing something that is both false and expensive. You are freezing the narrative at the current data point and calling it the entire story. But the story is not finished. The next chapter is not written by the income number. It is written by the state that will determine the next decisions, the next perceptions, the next responses to opportunity. Read your condition correctly, as the result of what has been, not the definition of what must continue. There is a specific interior movement that breaks the poverty identity belief, and it does not require visible evidence before it can begin. It requires only the decision to reinterpret what you are, not to perform a new identity for an audience, not to pretend that circumstances are other than they are, but to make an internal decision about where you stand in relation to the source and its supply. You are not a poverty case. You are not the sum of your financial history. You are a being through whom the source is capable of moving freely, and the only question is whether your internal state is cooperating with that movement or blocking it. The moment you begin to answer that question seriously, the poverty agreement has received its first serious challenge. The poverty agreement is not confronted by a single dramatic moment of decision, although that moment may catalyze the process. It is confronted by a sustained and deliberate withdrawal of internal agreement, day after day, thought after thought, word after word. Each time a poverty phrase rises to the lips and is replaced. Each time a poverty interpretation forms in the mind and is corrected. Each time the identity-level belief that says this is who I am is met with the counter-declaration that says the source is my supply and I am moving toward increase. These are not small events. They are the individual cells of the state change. Individually, they are barely visible. Collectively, they transform the climate. And here is the disruption that must settle into the deepest layer of your understanding. The condition outside you is not your enemy. The condition outside you is simply the current visible expression of the state inside you. Your enemy, to the degree that there is one, is the agreement inside you that keeps recreating the condition. And agreements are not fate. Agreements are not destiny. Agreements are decisions, made consciously or unconsciously, that can be made again differently. Poverty is a condition that can no longer remain when the inner state stops agreeing with it. This is not poetry. This is a description of the mechanism. When the mechanism changes, the output changes. Begin with the mechanism. There is something hidden inside the poverty cycle that you have not yet named. You have seen the visible cycle. You have seen how lack becomes identity, how identity becomes behavior, how behavior recreates condition. But inside all of that, operating beneath even the identity layer, there is something more specific. Something that functions like a permission, something that the system of poverty depends on in order to remain. It does not announce itself. It does not appear on the surface of your financial situation. It appears in the quietest moments, in the most private of your self-interpretations. It is the poverty agreement, and we will name it fully in this teaching. The poverty agreement is not always dramatic. It does not always sound like despair. Sometimes it sounds like modesty. Sometimes it sounds like spiritual humility. Sometimes it sounds like loyalty to your origins. Sometimes it sounds like a reasonable reading of your personal history. It is the hidden permission that allows lack to remain, even while the mouth is speaking of increase, even while the surface level of the self is working toward change. You can want more with one part of the mind, while another part of the mind is quietly, consistently, persistently agreeing that more is not actually for you. And as long as that deeper agreement is in place, it will undermine everything above it. This inner permission may appear as guilt, not the guilt of having done something wrong, the guilt of wanting something better, the uncomfortable feeling that arises when life begins to improve, as though the improvement is somehow a betrayal of those who did not improve, as though your increase must come at the cost of someone else's standing. This guilt does not feel like a poverty agreement. It feels like sensitivity. It feels like compassion. But when it causes you to reject increase, to stay small in the name of belonging, to limit receiving in order to remain relatable, it is functioning as a poverty agreement with the language of virtue as its cover. The poverty agreement may appear as modesty, the performance of not wanting too much, of asking for less than is deserved, of presenting yourself as simpler than you are, as needing less than you need, as satisfied with less than would be fully alive. This modesty is not the spiritual humility that Wattles described. It is a suppression of the desire that the Source placed inside you as a directive toward fuller life. The desire for more is not evidence of greed. It is evidence that you are alive, that the Source within you is pressing toward fuller expression. Calling the suppression of that desire modesty is giving a spiritual name to a poverty agreement. The poverty agreement may appear as realism. The part of you that says, look at the evidence, look at the history, look at the numbers, be practical, be sensible. Do not deceive yourself with unrealistic expectations. And the realism sounds protective. It sounds like wisdom earned through experience. But when the realism consistently lands on the side of lack, when it systematically undermines every movement toward increase, when it never seems to produce conclusions that favor expansion, then it is not realism. It is a poverty agreement operating with the authority of lived experience. The Source is not limited by what your history has produced. Your history is not a prophecy. It is a record. The poverty agreement may appear as family loyalty, the deep human impulse to remain connected to those who came before, to honor the journey of parents and grandparents who struggled, to not separate yourself so far from your origins that belonging is lost. This is a genuine and powerful human need, but when it causes you to limit your financial life in order to stay recognizable to people who expected you to remain limited, it has become a poverty agreement wearing the language of love. The people who struggled before you did not struggle so that you would also struggle. They struggled through circumstances that were theirs. You are not honoring them by recreating their poverty. You are honoring them by building on what they survived. Later in this teaching, we will reveal every face of this hidden agreement. We will name the forms it takes, the sentences it produces, the behaviors it generates. We will look at precisely how the poverty agreement allows lack to remain even in a life that has stopped wanting lack on the surface level. And we will give you the specific practice of withdrawal, the act of removing your internal agreement from poverty, one layer at a time. Because the question is not whether you want more. You clearly do. The question is whether there is a part of you, beneath the wanting, that still agrees with the poverty that has been your companion for so long. There is, and we are going to find it. The most important thing to understand right now as we prepare to go deeper is that the poverty agreement is not a character flaw. It is not a sign of weakness or stupidity or spiritual failure. It is what the mind does with prolonged exposure to lack. It builds a model, it builds a map, it starts treating the map as the territory. And then it defends the map against all incoming information that might challenge it, not out of stubbornness, but out of the deep neurological and psychological drive toward internal consistency. The poverty agreement is the mind protecting its map. But the map is not the territory. The Source is the territory, and the Source is limitless. What you will do in this teaching is begin drawing a new map. Everything begins with thought. Not thought as a casual stream of inner commentary, but thought as the first movement of the cause that eventually produces visible life. When the dominant thought is one of lack, of shortage, of not enough, of being behind, of money as scarce and difficult and suspicious, the entire mental system begins organizing itself around those thoughts. Expectation forms, and expectation is not a passive prediction. Expectation is an active orientation. The mindset to expect lack is preparing, at every level of perception and decision, to encounter and confirm lack. Expectation shapes perception. This is not a metaphor. It is a description of how the perceptual system actually operates. A mind that is expecting lack will filter incoming information through that expectation and will notice evidence of lack with greater speed and weight than evidence of supply. An opportunity that is genuinely present in the environment may not even register as an opportunity if the expectant inner state has labeled the category of that channel as unavailable. You can be standing in proximity to a real and open channel of supply, while your perception, shaped by a poverty expectation, processes it as something irrelevant to your situation. The channel is visible. Your state makes it invisible to you. Speech reinforces identity. Every sentence that begins with "I am poor, I cannot afford," money never stays with me, people like me do not receive things like that, is doing more than communicating a current condition. It is issuing a spoken order to the identity. Speech is not only description. In the framework of spiritual law, speech is instruction. It is a command given to the self about what category it occupies and what kind of experiences it should therefore expect. And the identity receives those commands and adjusts accordingly. The spoken poverty sentence is a self-issued instruction to remain poor. It does not feel like that when you say it. It feels like an accurate report, but it is an order, and the deeper layers of the self obey it. Identity shapes choices. This is where the mechanism becomes most practically visible. When poverty has become identity, the choices that flow from that identity are poverty-consistent choices. The negotiation where you accept less than the value of your work. The opportunity you decline because the room feels too elevated. The offer you fail to make because the fear of rejection feels like certainty of rejection. The investment you avoid because money is something to hoard, not to plant. The skill you fail to develop because someone like me does not need that level of expertise. Every one of these choices feels rational to the person making them from inside the poverty identity. Every one of them narrows the field of available channels. Choices create conditions, and the conditions that poverty identity choices create are conditions that look exactly like the poverty that the identity was already expecting. The under-negotiated contract confirms that the viewer cannot charge full value. The avoided opportunity confirms that better rooms are not for them. The missed investment confirms that increase is not available in their direction. The conditions that result from poverty identity choices land in the life as visible evidence, and the visible evidence is then read back into the belief system as proof. The cycle is not broken from the outside. It cannot be. It is broken from the state. Conditions confirm beliefs. The outer life is constantly providing feedback to the inner state, and the inner state is constantly interpreting the feedback in ways that confirm itself. This is the mechanism that makes poverty feel so permanent. It is not permanent in the way that gravity is permanent. It is persistent in the way that a self-confirming cycle is persistent. Every rotation of the cycle produces more evidence for the belief that drives it, and the evidence is real. The bank account numbers are real, the closed doors are real, the failed attempts are real. What is not real is the conclusion that this evidence leads to when it says, "This is who you are." That conclusion is an interpretation, and it is a false one. Beliefs deepen the state. As the cycle rotates and evidence accumulates, the poverty belief is not merely maintained, it is reinforced. It becomes more deeply embedded in the structure of the self. It becomes more automatic. It becomes more difficult to challenge because it now has an extensive archive of evidence. The poverty state deepens with each rotation, and a deeper poverty state produces more poverty-consistent choices, which produce more poverty-consistent conditions, which produce more confirming evidence, which deepens the state further. This is why many sincere people with genuine desire for change find that change remains elusive. The cycle is running deeper than the surface-level desire can easily reach. A poverty state repeats poverty decisions, not because the person is incapable of better decisions, not because better options do not exist in their environment, because the state that is operating beneath their decision-making is poverty-trained and will consistently produce decisions that are consistent with poverty. This is not a judgment, it is a mechanical observation. A machine calibrated to produce a particular output will produce that output regardless of how much the operator wants a different result. The machine must be recalibrated, the state must change, and the state change must reach the depth at which the decisions are actually being generated, not merely the surface level of conscious intention. A wealth state prepares for increase. The person in whom the state has shifted stops filtering opportunities through a poverty lens. They begin noticing channels that were always present but previously invisible. They make choices that are consistent with increase rather than consistent with limitation. They enter rooms that their previous state would have refused. They price their work at its value. They make offers with confidence. They receive gifts and opportunities without the guilt and shame that used to cause them to deflect. They prepare. And preparation is not a sign of self-deception. It is an act of alignment. It is the state expressing itself through action before the visible evidence has fully arrived. Source responds to the state embodied by action. This is the certain way described in its most essential form. The source is not persuaded by wishes. The source is not activated by desires that are not embodied in the behavior. What the source responds to, in the framework of Wattles, is the complete expression of the state through living. Through thought aligned with increase, through speech that confirms supply, through action that is consistent with the new identity, through faith that does not require visible proof before it continues to move. When the state is fully embodied, when every layer of the self has withdrawn its agreement from poverty and entered into alignment with increase, poverty becomes impossible. Not unlikely. Impossible, because it has lost the inner environment in which it can sustain itself. Poverty becomes impossible when the whole system refuses to cooperate with it, when the thoughts do not confirm it, when the speech does not order it, when the expectation does not prepare for it, when the choices do not reproduce it, when the identity does not host it, when the perception does not filter for it, when the action does not enact it, when not one layer of the self is still silently agreeing with it. This is the one mental state that makes poverty impossible, not a technique, not a strategy, not a routine, a state, a complete multi-layered withdrawal of inner agreement from the condition of lack. That is what you are building in this teaching. Invisible supply works because the mechanism by which supply reaches you is fundamentally inner before it is outer. The channels through which increase flows are opened or closed, not primarily by external circumstances, but by the state that determines what you notice, what you pursue, what you accept, what you ask for, and how you respond when supply arrives. When every part of that interior mechanism is aligned with receiving, the invisible supply finds its way to you through channels you could not have predicted, through doors that were not visible from the position of the poverty state. This is not magic. This is the natural output of a system that has been recalibrated at every level to cooperate with increase rather than confirm lack. There is a difference between a command and a plan. Most people who are working on their financial lives are working primarily at the level of the plan. They are adjusting methods, changing strategies, finding new channels, trying new approaches. And plans are not without value. A good plan is a genuine tool. But a plan that is built on the foundation of a poverty identity is a plan that is operating in a permanently compromised environment. The plan may create income, but the poverty identity beneath the plan will find ways to leak it. The income arrives, and before it can build, before it can compound, before it can become the foundation of something larger, the poverty identity has already begun the work of returning the life to the familiar state of lack. A command is different from a plan in that it operates at the identity level rather than the method level. A command says, "I no longer agree with poverty," not, "I have found a new method that should produce more income," not, "I am going to try harder this time. I no longer agree with poverty." This is a declaration made at the level of the self, not the level of the strategy. And when the command is genuine, when it reaches all the way down to the layer where the identity is actually being maintained, it changes the environment in which every plan subsequently operates. Plans that serve a poverty identity become plans that serve an increase identity. The same tools produce different results because the state operating beneath them is different. A plan may create opportunity, a new collaboration, an expanded network, a better positioned service, a more visible expression of a talent that was previously hidden. But poverty identity hides from opportunity. It approaches the opportunity with the question, "Is this really for me?" And since the identity is poverty trained, the answer that forms most naturally is a qualified one at best. There is always a reason to hesitate, always a reason to wait, always a reason to require more evidence before moving forward. The poverty identity that hides from opportunity is not being cautious, it is being consistent with itself, and its consistency will eventually exhaust even the most genuinely available opportunity. A plan may bring help, a mentor who offers guidance, a person with resources who sees potential, a network that is ready to extend itself in the direction of someone who is genuinely moving toward increase. But poverty identity refuses help. not always explicitly. Sometimes the refusal is structural. It fails to ask clearly. It downplays need in order to avoid the vulnerability of receiving. It accepts help with so much apologetic qualification that the helper eventually withdraws, not out of unwillingness to give, but out of the exhaustion of giving to someone who seems unable to receive. The poverty identity that refuses help is not being independent. It is enacting the poverty agreement that says receiving is dangerous, that increase creates debt, that help creates obligation. The command says, "I no longer agree with poverty." And once that command is issued at the identity level and backed by consistent thought, speech, and action, everything else changes. The plan then serves the new state, rather than being undermined by the old one. The opportunity is approached with the expectation of a person who is moving toward increase, rather than the hesitation of a person who is waiting for confirmation of worthiness. The help is received with the natural gratitude of someone who understands that supply moves through channels, and that the assistance of others is one of those channels, not a threat to independence, but an expression of the source delivering through human form. Without a state change, plans become temporary. You have perhaps experienced this already. A period of improvement, of income increase, of genuine forward movement, followed by a return to the familiar condition. Not always through dramatic failure, sometimes through a slow erosion that is difficult to trace to any single decision. The plan worked, but the state did not change deeply enough to support the plan indefinitely. The plan operated in an environment that the poverty state eventually reclaimed. This is not a failure of intelligence or effort. It is a failure of depth. The change did not go deep enough to reach the layer where the identity is maintained. With a state change, plans become channels. When the inner state has genuinely shifted, when the identity has moved from poverty-hosted to source-aligned, a good plan is no longer fighting against the identity that operates beneath it. The plan and the state are moving in the same direction. Every strategy serves the same master. The new income is not quietly undermined before it can build. The new opportunity is not rejected before it can develop. The new relationship with a mentor is not sabotaged by the discomfort of receiving. Everything is working together. And when everything is working together, increase is not a temporary event. It is the natural output of a system that is fully aligned. The poverty identity can survive a very impressive external plan. It has done so repeatedly in the lives of people who wondered why their genuinely good strategies kept producing the same result. The identity is a more fundamental level of operation than the strategy. A strategy is a method for moving from where you are to where you want to go. An identity is the definition of where you are. If the identity has not changed, the strategy always starts from the same place. And a strategy that always starts from the same place tends to end in the same place, no matter how many times it is revised at the surface level. The starting point is the identity. Change the identity. Let the plan serve the new starting point. The command that breaks the poverty identity is not a mantra said once in a moment of inspiration. It is a sustained decision, backed by every layer of the self. It is the thought that does not revert to the poverty narrative when the visible evidence still looks like lack. It is the speech that refuses the poverty sentence even when the poverty sentence would feel like an accurate report. It is the action that expresses increase before the numbers have confirmed it. It is the expectation that stands firm while the outer world is still showing the previous state's output. The command is not a single word. It is an ongoing refusal to allow poverty to remain as the identity from which all else is generated. And that refusal is the most powerful plan you can make. The plan serves the command, not the other way around. When the command is in place, when the identity level refusal of poverty is genuine and sustained, then plans become powerful tools in the hands of a state that is ready to receive their results. Then the good strategy builds. The income that arrives does not leak before it can compound. The opportunity that comes is approached by someone whose state says yes, rather than someone whose state is looking for reasons to say not yet. The help that is offered is received by a person who understands that the source is the origin, and that all forms of increase, whether they arrive through human channels or unexpected circumstances, are expressions of the same infinite supply. The plan serves the command. Begin with the command. If this teaching is landing somewhere deeper than financial strategy, if you are beginning to see that poverty is not only a condition in the account, but a hosted agreement in the self, then you have found a channel through which the masters speak directly. The master's legacy exists for exactly this moment in the viewer's life, the moment when the surface work has been done, and what is needed now is the deeper law. Subscribe to this channel, because what you will find here is not temporary motivation. It is not surface-level encouragement. It is the transformation of the state, taught through the timeless voices of those who understood the laws of mind, source, wealth, and spiritual identity at their most fundamental level. Subscribe now, and let the teaching continue to work in you. Wallace Wattles did not teach people to want more. He taught people to change what they were being. And the difference between wanting more and changing what you are being is the difference between a desire and a transformation. This channel is committed to transformation, not to teaching viewers how to feel better temporarily, but how to become permanently different at the level of the state that generates the life. If you are serious about that transformation, if you want to understand not just one law but the full architecture of the certain way, subscribe and stay with this teaching as it continues to build. The masters left a legacy. This channel is dedicated to preserving it, interpreting it, and delivering it to those who are ready for it. The poverty mind cannot calculate wealth, not because it is incapable of arithmetic, but because the mind trained by poverty has developed a very specific skill, the skill of seeing all incoming information through the lens of lack. When that mind encounters a potential path toward increase, it does not evaluate the path neutrally, it evaluates it through the poverty filter. And the poverty filter is very good at finding the reasons why the path will not work, why the channel will not open, why the opportunity is not real, why success in that direction is not realistic for someone with this particular history. The poverty mind genuinely believes it is being analytical. It is actually being faithful to its poverty state. The old state cannot imagine the doors that open to the new state. This is not a spiritual metaphor being used as a comfort. It is a literal description of what happens when the inner state changes. The doors that become available to a person in a wealth state of consciousness are not doors that the poverty state could have discovered, because they are not visible to the poverty state's perceptual system. The poverty state's perception is calibrated for shortage. It filters for limitation. The channels of supply that exist in the world are numerous and varied, and some of them are entirely invisible to a mind that is not prepared to recognize them as channels. The new state does not just think more positively about the same doors, it opens a different set of doors entirely. The mind trained by poverty calls increase unrealistic because it has never lived as a receiver of increase. Its database of experience is built from a history of lack. Its predictive models are derived from that database. When it encounters a potential path toward a level of supply it has not experienced, it has no experiential evidence that such a path is viable for someone of its category. And so it concludes that it is not. The conclusion is not irrational given the data available to the poverty mind, but the data available to the poverty mind is incomplete. It is limited to the experience of one state. The source has more data. The source sees more channels. The source does not calculate the how through a poverty filter. This is why the release of the how is not merely a spiritual nicety in the certain way. It is a practical necessity. The poverty-trained mind's calculation of the how will consistently underestimate the number of available channels and overestimate the number of obstacles. If you require yourself to be able to see the complete path forward before you take the first step, and if your vision is poverty-filtered, then you will very rarely take any step at all, because the poverty filter will always find sufficient reason to wait. The release of the how is an act of trusting a vision larger than the poverty mind's perceptual capacity. It is an act of trusting the source to see what the fear-trained mind cannot. When the state changes and the poverty filter begins to dissolve, something remarkable begins to occur in the field of perception. Channels that were always present but invisible begin to register. Opportunities that the poverty mind would have dismissed as irrelevant begin to look different. The person who is moving toward increase begins to notice conversations that the previous state would have filtered out, begins to respond to invitations that would previously have generated only the quiet internal voice of disqualification. The environment has not changed, the supply available in the world has not changed, the perception has changed, and changed perception is the beginning of changed circumstance. The poverty mind is not your enemy. It is a protective mechanism built from a genuine history of limitation, doing its best to prevent you from exposure to further disappointment. Honor its history, but do not give it authority over your future. The source is not limited by your history. The invisible supply does not diminish because your account has been low. The channels are not closed because previous channels disappointed. The way forward for a person in the certain way is not calculated by the poverty mind. It is received by a state of clarity, faith, and expectation that is open to the source's supply arriving through any form it chooses. That openness is itself a form of intelligence that the poverty mind, for all its calculations, does not possess. Imagine a room. The room is sealed. The temperature inside the room has been maintained below freezing for a very long time. Every surface in the room carries the imprint of that cold. The walls, the floor, the air itself, all calibrated to the frozen temperature. Now place a seed of summer fruit inside that room. Plant it in fertile soil. Water it carefully. Give it attention, and then wait. The seed contains within itself everything needed to become the fruit. The genetic information is complete. The potential is real. The desire of the seed to grow is, in the metaphorical language of natural life, genuine. But the climate of the room will not support what the seed contains. The fruit cannot grow in frost. The seed is your desire. The desire for more, for financial peace, for supply that is adequate to the full life you are designed to live. That desire is real. It is not trivial. It is not greed. In the framework of Wattles, desire is the movement of the source pressing through you toward fuller expression. The desire is the seed, and the seed is genuine, but desire alone does not produce the harvest. The climate in which the desire is held determines whether it can germinate, grow, develop, and eventually yield the fruit that was always contained within it. Desire planted in poverty consciousness is desire planted in a frozen room. The seed is real. The climate defeats it. The inner state is the climate, not the effort, not the strategy, not the number of hours worked, or the intelligence of the plan. The inner state, the sustained, habitual, mostly unconscious orientation of the self toward supply, toward receiving, toward the source, toward increase. The climate is built from thousands of individual thoughts, each one contributing to the overall temperature of the interior. A single cold thought does not freeze the room, but years of consistently cold thoughts, years of poverty narrative, years of lack expectation and shortage speech, produce a climate that is inhospitable to the growth of what the seed of desire contains. The room is cold because it has been fed cold for a very long time. Poverty consciousness is frost. It is not simply an absence of warmth, it is an active condition of suppression. Frost does not merely fail to support growth, it actively inhibits growth. It freezes what was beginning to develop. It kills what was beginning to emerge. The poverty state does not merely fail to produce increase, it actively suppresses the signals, the perceptions, the choices, and the behaviors that would allow increase to develop. Every time the poverty thought enters, it does not merely fail to advance the cause, it lowers the temperature, it reinforces the frost. The active nature of poverty consciousness as a suppressing force is what makes it so persistent, and why casual surface-level changes are rarely enough to sustain increase. Wealth consciousness is warmth, not the heat of desperation or the frantic warmth of forced optimism. The sustained, reliable warmth of a climate that has been deliberately and consistently maintained at a temperature that supports growth. Wattles described this as thinking in the certain way, not occasionally thinking hopeful thoughts, not performing gratitude for an audience, but maintaining, through deliberate and sustained practice, an inner climate of trust, expectation, gratitude, and faith. This is warmth that does not depend on the current weather outside the room. The outside may still be winter, the room is summer. Because the room's temperature is maintained from within, action, is cultivation. It is the turning of the soil, the tending of the plant, the work of a person who is not waiting for the harvest to prove that the work is worthwhile before they continue working. Action in the certain way is not the desperate action of someone who is trying to force a result from a poverty state. It is the purposeful, efficient action of someone who is maintaining the climate while the invisible process works toward the visible result. The cultivation is real. It is necessary. Wattles was clear that action was not optional, but the action is different when it comes from a wealth state. It is grounded, it is consistent, it does not abandon the work because the fruit has not yet appeared. Gratitude is sunlight, not gratitude as a transaction, where you perform thankfulness in order to receive more. Gratitude as an orientation that acknowledges the supply that is already moving. Gratitude in the framework of the certain way is the recognition that the source is active, that increase is already in motion, that the present moment, even in its imperfection, is not a condition of abandonment. Gratitude opens the interior to more of what the source is already sending. It keeps the temperature warm even on the days when the visible evidence is still catching up to the state. Without gratitude, even the best plan is operating in a climate that is cooling. Faith is water. It is the consistent nourishment that does not wait for visible proof before it continues to sustain the growth. Faith, in the context of the certain way, is not the faith that claims certainty about every specific outcome. It is the faith that maintains the state of expectation and trust in the source, even when the outer world has not yet confirmed the inner state. Water does not ask whether the seed will become fruit before it continues to nourish the root. It nourishes. The fruit follows. Faith is the sustained willingness to nourish the inner state with trust and expectation, even when the visible harvest has not yet appeared. Repetition stabilizes the climate. The poverty state did not form from a single thought. It formed from the repetition of thoughts that were consistent with lack over a sustained period of time. The wealth state forms the same way through repetition, through the consistent daily return to the certain way, through the repeated correction of the poverty thought when it arises, through the regular practice of gratitude and expectation and faith, through the daily decisions that are consistent with a person who is moving toward increase. Each repetition adds warmth. Each repetition stabilizes the climate. Eventually, the new climate is the default, and the frost has nothing left to hold. The law is clear and complete. Poverty cannot grow in a wealth climate. Wealth cannot grow in a poverty climate. The conditions for life are set by the interior climate, and the interior climate is set by the sustained, consistent, repeated orientation of the self toward either lack or supply. This is not a soft observation. It is a hard law. The same way that summer fruit cannot grow in a frozen room regardless of the quality of the seed, prosperity cannot grow in a poverty state regardless of the quality of the plan. Change the climate. That is the whole instruction. Everything else follows from the climate change. The seed is already good, the soil is available. The source is the supply of all warmth, all sunlight, all water. Change the climate and let the law work. The poverty climate is maintained through specific, identifiable patterns of thought, speech, and behavior. These are not abstract forces. They are concrete daily habits that lower the interior temperature every time they are performed. The most persistent and pervasive of them is the spoken declaration of inability. I cannot afford anything, not said as an occasional observation of a temporary circumstance, said as an identity statement, said as a description of category, said in a tone that communicates permanence. Each time this sentence is spoken with poverty identity conviction, it performs a function. It lowers the interior temperature. It reinforces the frost. It confirms the climate of lack and prevents the seed of desire from finding warmth, feeling shame when receiving. This is one of the most insidious interference patterns because it attacks at the point of delivery. Supply arrives through a channel, whether it is a gift, an act of generosity, an unexpected opportunity, an above-average income moment, and instead of receiving it with the natural openness that allows it to fully land, the shame response activates. You feel that you do not deserve it. You feel watched and judged. You minimize it, deflect it, apologize for it, or accept it with such qualification that it cannot fully enter your life. Shame at the point of receiving is the poverty climate intercepting the delivery. The supply was sent. The shame intercepted it. The account reflects the interception, not the sending. Undercharging is the poverty climate expressing itself through the most direct financial channel available. Every time you price below your value, you are not being humble. You are maintaining the poverty state through a concrete financial behavior. You are telling the system, this is the level of supply that corresponds to a person in my category, and the system confirms it. The invoice that was written from a poverty state produces a return from a poverty state. The rate that was calculated by the poverty identity keeps the income at the level that the poverty identity has determined is appropriate. Undercharging is not a pricing problem. It is a climate problem expressed in numbers. Avoiding people who operate at a higher level of prosperity is the poverty climate protecting its temperature. The proximity of people who are receiving freely and operating with confidence in their supply creates a kind of atmospheric pressure on the poverty state. It shows by contrast that the poverty climate is not universal. It shows that increase is not impossible. It shows that the poverty identity story about what is available to a person in your general category is not a law. It is a story. And the poverty climate cannot sustain itself easily in the presence of that living contradiction, so it avoids the rooms where the contradiction lives. It calls the avoidance discernment. It is not discernment. It is frost defending its temperature. Rejecting opportunity is the poverty climate at the level of decision. When a genuine channel of supply arrives, whether in the form of an offer, an invitation, an introduction, a collaboration, or an unexpected opening, and the poverty-trained response is to find the reasons it will not work, the reasons it is not really for you, the reasons caution is more appropriate than movement, the climate is actively blocking delivery, the opportunity did not fail to arrive, the state rejected it on arrival, and the visible result is indistinguishable from never having received the opportunity at all. You look at your life and see that opportunities have not come. What may actually be true is that opportunities have arrived, and the poverty climate returned them to sender. Resenting wealthy people is a particularly corrosive interference because it creates a moral prohibition against the very state you are trying to achieve. If wealth is associated with the morally suspect, then every movement toward wealth is a movement toward becoming something morally diminished. The poverty climate uses this association to make increase feel like a betrayal of character. And the protection this moral story offers is so satisfying that it is among the most resistant forms of interference to dissolve. Your resentment of wealthy people is not a moral position. It is the poverty climate manufacturing a reason to refuse the supply that the source is capable of providing to you in exactly the same measure it has provided to those you resent. Expecting loss is the mental preparation for poverty that the poverty climate performs automatically. Before the income arrives, expectation of loss is already calculating how it will disappear. Before the opportunity develops, expectation of loss is already drafting the story of how it will fall through. The expectation is so automatic that it rarely surfaces as a clear thought. It lives beneath the surface as a posture, a bracing, a pre-grief. And the decisions made from that posture are poverty-consistent decisions. They do not prepare for increase. They prepare for loss, and the preparation for loss is itself a form of maintenance of the poverty climate that produces loss. Calling struggle noble is the poverty climate's deepest self-justification. It is the story that transforms the condition of lack into a virtue, that makes poverty not just a circumstance to be changed, but a spiritual credential to be defended. When struggle is noble, ease becomes suspect. When lack is honorable, increase becomes evidence of moral compromise. And the poverty climate is sustained not just by habit, but by a belief that it is the right way to be. This is the poverty agreement in its most defended form. Breaking it does not require you to become callous or materialistic or spiritually shallow. It requires you to recognize that the source is not honored by your poverty, and that the nobility you have assigned to struggle is a story the poverty climate invented to protect itself. There is a freedom available to you right now before a single external circumstance has changed. It is the freedom of no longer needing the outer evidence to confirm the inner state, before the inner state is allowed to be fully itself. It is the freedom that comes from understanding that your state is the cause and the visible world is the effect, and that the cause does not wait for the effect's permission before it becomes what it is. You may still see lack around you. The numbers may not have changed. The channels may not yet be visibly different. But you no longer have to belong to what you see. You can see a thing without being it. You can live in a temporary condition without agreeing to be that condition permanently. You may still see lack, but you no longer belong to it. This is the beginning of the freedom. Not the end of the problem, not the moment when the bank account catches up. The beginning of the freedom. The moment when you look at the visible evidence and refuse to let it complete its identity transaction with you. You see the number. You do not say, I am that number. You see the closed door. You do not say, all doors are closed to me. You see the difficulty. You do not say, difficulty is the permanent texture of my life. You see without agreeing. And seeing without agreeing is the beginning of the state change that eventually changes what is seen. The numbers may not change in one moment, but the state can. This is one of the most important practical insights in this entire teaching. Most people are waiting for the numbers to change before they allow the state to change. But the state is the cause. The numbers are the effect. The effect cannot precede the cause. The numbers will change when the state changes and when the state has been consistently maintained long enough to have produced new decisions, new perceptions, new actions, and new responses to opportunity. That takes time. The state change can begin today. The number change follows the state change. Begin where beginning is possible. Begin with the state. The freedom of not tracking the package is the freedom of trusting the delivery system without needing to monitor every stage of transit. When you place an order from a trusted source and you know the order has been dispatched, you do not spend every waking moment in anxious calculation of whether the delivery is on its way. You prepare to receive. You know it is coming. You get on with the work of living in alignment with the expectation of its arrival. The poverty state, however, tracks obsessively. It scans for visible confirmation at every moment. It needs to see the package at every point in transit, or it begins to doubt that it was ever sent. And the anxiety of obsessive tracking is itself a form of poverty climate maintenance. Trust the source. The dispatch has been made. Prepare to receive. The state change precedes the visible change, and the gap between the two can be a test of the very faith that the certain way requires. The outer world is reflecting a previous state. It takes time for the accumulated output of the old state to be replaced by the accumulated output of the new state. During that gap, the visible evidence still looks like the old story. The poverty climate is still visible even though the interior has begun to warm. This gap is where many people abandon the new state and return to the old one, because they interpret the ongoing visible evidence as proof that the inner change is not real or is not working. But the gap is not evidence of failure. It is the natural delay between cause and effect. Hold the new state through the gap. The practical instruction embedded in this freedom is to stop making the continuation of your new inner state contingent on visible proof. The poverty state was not contingent on visible proof. It maintained itself even on the days when circumstances were temporarily better. It held the poverty narrative in place even when the evidence was briefly in conflict with it. The new state must learn to do the same in the opposite direction. It must hold the wealth narrative in place even when the evidence is still showing the residue of the previous state. This is not delusion. It is the application of the law of causation in full awareness. The state is the cause, the evidence is the effect. Hold the cause, let the effect follow. When the state changes and the poverty agreement dissolves layer by layer, the old condition loses its home. Poverty is not merely a circumstance that persists by its own momentum. It is a condition that requires a host. The host is the inner agreement. The inner agreement provides the climate, the identity, the decisions, and the perceptions that allow poverty to sustain itself. When those are withdrawn, when the climate warms, when the identity shifts, when the decisions change, when the perceptions open to new channels, the old condition has nowhere to live. It loses its home, and a condition without a host does not linger indefinitely. The source which has been waiting for the agreement to be withdrawn begins to express itself through every channel that the new state has opened to receive it. The first step in applying the certain way to the poverty agreement inside you is to define the what, not the how. The how belongs to the source. The what belongs to you. You must define the state that makes poverty impossible, not the income level, not the specific financial outcome. The state, the interior orientation, the way of being in relation to supply. And the most direct way to begin defining it is to ask a series of questions that you may never have asked yourself before, because the poverty identity has rarely allowed them to be taken seriously. What would you think if poverty were no longer your identity? Not what would you do differently? What would you think? How would the interior commentary change? What narrative would replace the one that currently runs? When you imagine a day in which the poverty identity has been dissolved and the new state has fully taken hold, what are the thoughts that populate that day? Not fantasies about luxury, not vague wishes, but the actual texture of daily interior life in which the person is operating from increase, from source supply, from the expectation of a receiver. Define that texture. That texture is the what. What would you say if poverty were no longer your identity? Think about the specific sentences you speak most often about money, about your financial condition, about what is possible for you. Now think about what a person in the certain way would say instead. Not an optimist who is ignoring difficulty. A person who is genuinely operating from a new state. What would that person say when a bill arrives? What would that person say when an opportunity appears? What would that person say about their future in a casual conversation? Define the language. The language is part of the what. What would you stop tolerating if poverty were no longer your identity? This question is important because the poverty identity has a remarkable tolerance for conditions that the new state would find unacceptable. The chronic undervaluing of work, the ongoing relationships that reinforce the poverty narrative, the environments that confirm lack, the financial habits that leak supply. The poverty identity tolerates these because they are familiar, and because the discomfort of challenging them feels greater than the discomfort of continuing to live with them. Define what the new state would stop tolerating. That intolerance is part of the identity change. What would you start preparing for if poverty were no longer your identity? Preparation is a powerful expression of state. The person who prepares for increase is already living in a different relationship to supply than the person who is only managing lack. Preparation says, something is coming toward me that is worth getting ready for. It says, the supply that is in transit deserves a prepared landing place. What would you begin to prepare? A skill, a financial organization, a capacity to receive more and manage it well, a readiness for the opportunity that is coming through a channel you cannot yet see. Define the preparation. It is not the how. It is the expression of a state that has already said yes to increase. How would you act if increase were natural to you? Natural, not forced, not performed, not the result of enormous willpower directed against a resistance that is always fighting back. Natural. The behavior of someone for whom operating in alignment with supply is not a daily battle, but a daily expression of who they actually are. Would you price differently? Would you make the offer without the apologetic qualification? Would you enter the room with a different posture? Would you receive the gift without the shame response? Would you speak about your future without the hedging and the minimizing? Define the natural behavior of the new state. It is the what. The statement that follows from these definitions is not a mantra to be repeated mindlessly. It is a declaration of a genuine interior decision. I no longer agree with poverty as identity. I live as one supplied by source. Each word of this declaration carries the weight of the definitions you have just made. Not agreeing with poverty means that every time a poverty thought, sentence, or behavior arises, there is now a command in place that names it as no longer aligned with the state you are inhabiting. Living as one supplied by source means operating from the assumption that supply is real, that it is available to you, and that the source is actively expressing itself in your direction through channels both visible and invisible. The act of defining the what is not an exercise in creative visualization for its own sake. It is the establishment of a blueprint. In the certain way, the clear mental image is not merely a pleasant picture held in moments of meditation. It is the ongoing reference point against which every thought, word, and action is measured. Does this thought belong to the old state or the new one? Does this sentence serve the poverty identity or the source identity? Does this action come from someone who has internally agreed with poverty or from someone who has internally refused it? The what is the standard. Without the standard, every moment of life is simply the automatic output of whatever state is currently dominant. With the standard, every moment is an opportunity to choose the state. The what is also a statement to the source. In the framework of Wattles, the clear mental image held in the certain way is not merely a personal preference, it is a communication. The state you embody, the identity you inhabit, the expectation you sustain is received by the formless substance of the source as the shape of what is to be delivered. This is not mechanical. It is not transactional in a simple exchange sense. But the law is consistent. The state that is genuinely embodied, that has been defined clearly and maintained faithfully, becomes the mold into which the invisible supply pours itself as it moves toward visible form. Define the what with clarity and maintain it with faith. The source responds to the state that is genuinely inhabited. The definition of the what is an act of courage. It is easier to remain undefined, to keep the desire vague enough that its non-arrival cannot be specifically identified as a failure. But vague desire is not the certain way. Wattles was specific. He described a clear and definite purpose held in a state of gratitude and faith. The what must be clear enough to live from, specific enough to inform behavior, and genuine enough to sustain the new state even when the outer world is still showing the old condition. Define the state that makes poverty impossible for you, not in general terms, in the specific language of your actual daily thought, speech, and action. That specificity is the what, and the what is where the transformation begins. The second step in the protocol is the release of the how, not as a passive surrender, not as an abandonment of practical wisdom, but as a deliberate act of returning to the source what belongs to the source. The how of supply is not your domain. The route through which increase travels is not within the scope of your planning mind to fully perceive or predict. The channels through which the infinite supply reaches visible form are more numerous, more varied, and more creative than any poverty-trained mind has the capacity to calculate. The release of the how is an act of acknowledging the source's wisdom and the mind's limitation. The first practice in releasing the how is to stop saying, "I cannot." Not because the statement is never factually accurate in a narrow sense, but because the statement, as it is typically used by the poverty identity, is not a narrow factual observation. It is an identity declaration. I cannot is the poverty state describing the permanent shape of the self in relation to increase. When I cannot is replaced, even in the first tentative movements of the state change, with what channel can the source open here, the orientation shifts. You are no longer describing a permanent limitation. You are posing an open question to the intelligence of the source, and open questions receive answers that closed declarations never could. Stop shrinking desire. The poverty identity shrinks desire as a protective mechanism, keeping the wanting small enough that its non-fulfillment is not too painful. But small desire produces small alignment with the source. Wattles taught that the desire for a full and complete life, the desire for supply adequate to all that life requires, is not a personal excess. It is the pressure of the source moving through you toward fuller expression. Desire is directional. It points toward the next level of increase. When you shrink the desire, you reduce the directional signal, you make the navigation harder. Stop shrinking the desire. Let it be the full size of what the life you were given requires. Stop apologizing for increase. This is more pervasive than it sounds. The apology for increase appears in the qualifying sentence that immediately follows any good news. It appears in the minimizing of success in conversation with those who might judge it. It appears in the discomfort that arises when receiving more than you expected. The apology is the poverty identity, trying to maintain its relational standing in communities where the poverty narrative is shared. It is the effort to remain acceptable to those who have not yet begun their own state change. But the apology for increase is also a rejection of the source's delivery. When you apologize for what the source provided, you are making the provision feel like a mistake. Let increase be received without apology. Stop demanding instant proof. The poverty mind, trained by long experience of disappointment, is in a constant state of testing. It has issued a new inner declaration of increase, and now it is watching the outer world for immediate confirmation. And when the confirmation does not arrive in the expected time frame, the poverty mind declares the inner change of failure and returns to the safety of the familiar state. But the state change works on a different timeline than instant gratification. The seed planted today does not become fruit tomorrow. The climate change that has begun today will not be fully reflected in the outer environment for some time. Stop demanding instant proof. Let the state form before the visible evidence arrives. Stop competing with the poverty of others. One of the quieter behaviors of the poverty state is the comparison with others who are also in poverty. The poverty state uses proximity to others in lack as confirmation of its own position. Everyone around me is struggling. This is simply how life is at this level. The comparison normalizes the condition and reduces the urgency of the state change. But the fact that others in your environment are living in the poverty climate does not make the poverty climate the law. The source does not limit supply based on neighborhood averages. The state change is individual. It does not require the collective agreement of the environment before it can begin to produce its results. Let the state form before visible evidence arrives. This is the full instruction. Let the inner climate warm before the outer harvest appears. Let the identity shift before the numbers reflect it. Let the wealth consciousness deepen before the channels have fully opened. The state is primary. The evidence follows. This requires the kind of faith that Wattles was describing when he wrote about certainty. Not the certainty of someone who knows exactly how the supply will arrive. The certainty of someone who knows that the source is real, that the law is reliable, and that the inner state, when genuinely changed and consistently maintained, will produce the outer life that corresponds to it. Let the state form first. The release of the how is not passive. It is an active redirection of attention. Instead of calculating the route, you are maintaining the state. Instead of monitoring every possible channel with anxiety, you are holding the clarity of the what and trusting the intelligence of the source to know which channels are most aligned with the delivery. This is an active posture. It requires daily discipline. It requires the repeated choice to return to the state rather than fall back into the anxious calculation of the poverty mind. The release of the how is a practice, not a decision made once and then maintained effortlessly. It is a practice that becomes increasingly natural as the new state deepens. The poverty mind's demand to know the how before it will trust the what is a fundamental expression of the poverty agreement. It says, "Show me the route, and then I will believe the destination." But faith in the certain way operates in exactly the opposite direction. It says, "I know the destination because I have defined it clearly and held it in a state of gratitude and certainty. The route will reveal itself as I move. The how will emerge from the walking, not from the planning." This is not recklessness. It is a different relationship to knowledge, one that acknowledges the source as the origin of all routes and trusts that the source knows which door to open next. Release the how, hold the what. Walk as one who is moving toward increase. A practical description of the release of the how is this. Every morning before the day begins, choose the state rather than the plan, not in neglect of practical responsibilities, but in recognition that the state from which you engage the practical responsibilities determines how effectively they serve the increase that is in motion. Choose gratitude before the account is reviewed. Choose expectation before the opportunity has been identified. Choose the identity of someone supplied by source before the first difficulty of the day has arrived to challenge it. This daily choosing of the state before the evidence is the practice of releasing the how. It is the practice of living from the what. It is the certain way practiced in the first moment of every day. When the inner state has genuinely shifted and the poverty agreement has begun to dissolve, the outer life begins to change in ways that the poverty mind could not have predicted. And this is one of the most remarkable aspects of the certain way. The specific forms through which increase arrives are often not the forms that the poverty-trained imagination would have selected. The source's channels are creative. They are varied. They do not follow the narrow routes that the anxious mind mapped out as the only acceptable paths. A new state does not just think better thoughts about the same doors. It opens to a wider range of doors. Expect this. Expect to be surprised by the forms through which increase arrives. Better pricing begins to feel natural. The shame that used to arrive at the moment of presenting a rate for your work begins to dissolve. Not because you have forced yourself to present higher numbers through gritted teeth, but because the identity from which the number is offered has changed. You are no longer presenting a price that is calibrated to the category of a poverty-identified person. You are offering the value of your work at the level that a person supplied by source and moving toward increase determines is fair and right. The surprise is not the higher number itself. The surprise is how naturally it comes when the state has changed. The rate becomes the expression of the new identity rather than the performance of it. New clients arrive from unexpected directions. The person operating in the poverty climate tends to have a very narrow theory of where clients come from and how they are found. The theory is narrow because the poverty perception is narrow. When the state changes and the perception opens, the channels through which clients arrive multiply. The conversation at an unexpected gathering, the referral from someone who was never expected to refer, the opportunity that arrives through a connection that seemed irrelevant, the project that appears from a direction that the poverty mind would have dismissed as outside its category. Expect the unexpected direction. The source does not limit its channels to the ones the poverty mind has approved. Unusual opportunities begin to register as real. The poverty mind's filter works so efficiently to eliminate certain categories of opportunity that many people in the poverty state have genuinely never noticed a very specific type of chance that has appeared in their environment repeatedly. When the filter dissolves, these opportunities suddenly become visible. They were always there. The state was making them invisible. One of the early signs that the inner state has genuinely changed is the experience of suddenly noticing opportunities that seem new, but upon reflection may have been present for some time. This is not coincidence. This is the perceptual field expanding to receive what the new state has made visible. The courage to ask becomes available. Asking is one of the most consistent behaviors of a person who is genuinely operating in the certain way. Asking for the right price, asking for the opportunity, asking for the collaboration, asking for the information, asking for the help. The poverty state makes asking feel dangerous. The new state makes asking feel natural because a person who is supplied by source and who understands that supply moves through channels does not hesitate to engage with potential channels through the direct act of asking. The courage that was previously unavailable is suddenly accessible. Not because courage was absent before, but because the fear that blocked it was the poverty agreement, and the poverty agreement is dissolving. The confidence to publish, offer, and present what had previously been hidden becomes part of the new daily texture of life. The gift that was kept in reserve because the poverty identity was not sure it had the right to present it to the world. The offer that was never made because the poverty state had already delivered the rejection in advance. The work that was completed but never shown because showing meant exposure, and exposure meant potential confirmation of the poverty verdict. When the state changes, the withholding loses its rationale. The new identity says, I move as one who is increasing. I present what I have to offer. I do not preemptively reject myself on behalf of the world. Peace around money begins to replace anxiety. This is perhaps the most personally transformative aspect of the state change for many people who have lived with financial anxiety as a constant companion. The peace is not the peace of having more money. It is the peace of a different relationship to supply, a relationship that trusts the source rather than constantly scanning the visible evidence for confirmation that supply is sufficient. The peace comes from a genuine internal shift in the operating premise. From I must secure enough from the visible channels I can see, to the source is my supply, and I am in a receiving relationship with an infinite provision. The peace is the natural byproduct of that shift. The ability to act without shame around money, without the apologetic quality that has colored every financial interaction, becomes possible when the identity has genuinely changed. Money is no longer a subject that activates a complex mixture of guilt, desire, resentment, and inadequacy. It becomes, in the framework of the certain way, a visible expression of invisible supply that has flowed through channels into form. It is handled with dignity because the person handling it understands themselves as someone in a receiving relationship with the source. The shame around money was always a poverty agreement in disguise. As the agreement dissolves, the shame has no foundation left to stand on. The final step in the practical protocol is action, not future action, not action contingent on the full arrival of the new state, not action that requires perfect certainty before it begins. Present action. The nearest door, the one that is open right now in the current state of the state change, with all of its partial progress and incomplete certainty. Wattles was specific about this instruction. He said, "Act now on what is before you in the fullest way possible." The action proves the state. The action stabilizes the state. The action that is consistent with the new identity is the most powerful way to deepen the new identity that exists. Raise one price. This is a specific and concrete act of walking through the nearest door. Not every price. Not a dramatic restructuring of the entire financial life. One price. The one that has been most obviously calibrated to the poverty identity, rather than the actual value of the work. Find it. Change it. The act of changing it is not primarily about the money. It is about the identity transaction that occurs when you present the new number. It says at the level of action that the state has changed and that the new state is being expressed through behavior. Every concrete action of this kind deepens the new climate. Stop one poverty phrase. Choose one sentence from the vocabulary of your poverty identity, the one that you say most often, the one that feels most like truth, the one that is most consistently performing the function of the spoken order to remain poor. Stop it. Not permanently, as a final achievement. Stop it today. And tomorrow, stop it again. This is the practice of catching the poverty agreement in language and refusing to speak it into existence one more time. The silence where the poverty sentence used to be is not empty. It is potential. It is the space where a new sentence built from the source identity can begin to grow. Accept one appropriate gift. If the poverty agreement has included the pattern of deflecting gifts, of minimizing what others offer, of refusing appropriate help in order to protect the independence that the poverty state calls dignity, then accepting one appropriate gift with genuine openness is an act of tremendous spiritual and practical power. It is the training of the receiving reflex. It is the practice of allowing supply to land without the shame response, intercepting it at the point of arrival. It does not have to be financial. It can be any gift, any form of generosity extended in your direction. Receive it, fully, without qualification. Let the practice teach the state what receiving actually feels like. Make one offer, not a dozen offers, one. The offer of the skill, the service, the gift, the work, the talent that the poverty identity has been keeping in reserve, waiting for the certainty of acceptance before it is presented. One offer, made with the full confidence of a person who is moving toward increase and who understands that an offer is not a request for a verdict on personal worth. An offer is a channel engagement. It is the action of a person who believes that the source can deliver through the exchange of value. Make the offer. Do not wait for the poverty state to complete its calculation of whether the offer will be accepted. Make it and trust the source with the result. Organize one area of finances with dignity. The poverty state often expresses itself through the avoidance of financial organization. Because looking at the numbers in full means confronting the visible evidence, and the visible evidence is painful to the poverty identity. But organizing finances with dignity is not the same as confronting painful evidence from a poverty posture. It is the act of a person who is supplied by source and who treats the visible channels of supply with the respect and attention of a steward rather than the shame of a condemned person. Organize one area. Do it with care. Do it from the new state. Let the organization be an act of the new identity rather than a punishment from the old one. Enter one better room. Go somewhere, literally or metaphorically, where the standard of operation is higher than your poverty identity would say you deserve. a professional gathering, a conversation with a mentor, a space where people are operating at the level you are moving toward. The poverty identity will generate discomfort. It will generate the feeling of not belonging. Let the discomfort be present and go anyway. The act of entering the room while the poverty identity is still generating its objections is one of the most powerful state training exercises available. The body's presence in the room begins to tell the deeper self that this is where we are going, and the deeper self begins to adjust. Stop hiding one talent. Identify something that you do well, that has value in the world, that you have been keeping from view because the poverty identity determined in advance that the world would not want it, or that you did not have the right to offer it publicly. Stop hiding it today. Show it in one way to one person or one audience, however small. The act of making the hidden thing visible is an act of the new identity. It says, I move as one who is increasing. I do not keep the supply of my gifts from the world. I offer what has been given to me, and I trust the source to direct it to the channels where it will serve and through which it will return to me in the forms of increase. There is a reason the poverty agreement is so persistent, even in the lives of people who sincerely want to be free of it. The reason is that poverty, for all of its obvious cost, also provides something. It provides familiarity. And familiarity is a form of safety that the deep structure of the self values more than most people understand. The known quantity, even when it is painful, is neurologically and psychologically less threatening than the unknown quantity, even when the unknown holds more good. Poverty feels safe in the way that a cell feels safe. You know every dimension of it. You know what is expected of you within it. You know the rules, and the self that has been organized around those rules does not easily choose to leave. Increase requires visibility. This is one of the most real and least discussed costs of the state change. When you stop operating below your capacity and begin to express your full value, you become more visible. When you raise the price, you become visible in the market. When you make the offer, you become visible to the potential client and to the possibility of rejection. When you enter the better room, you become visible to people who are operating at a higher level and who may evaluate you. The poverty state's invisibility was not comfortable, but it was protected. Increase dissolves the protection of invisibility. And the self that valued the protection often resists increase, not for the obvious reasons, but for this quiet one. Increase requires responsibility. When more supply arrives, more responsibility for its use arrives with it. More decisions, more management, more complexity. The poverty state, paradoxically, is in some ways a simpler state to operate within. There is less to manage, the decisions are fewer. The poverty identity knows how to navigate poverty. It has no experience navigating abundance. And the anticipation of that unfamiliar complexity is enough to generate a resistance to the change that is genuine, even if it is almost never consciously acknowledged. I cannot handle success is one of the fear sentences that belongs to this layer. It is not only a fear of failure, it is a fear of the responsibility that success brings. Increase may change relationships. This is perhaps the deepest source of the false safety trap. The people in the current environment of the poverty state have built relationships within a certain shared narrative, a narrative of similar limitation, similar struggle, similar expectations about what is and is not available. When one person in that network begins to change their state, the relational equilibrium is disturbed. The success begins to feel like an implicit comment on the remaining poverty of those who have not changed their state. Relationships shift. Some become uncomfortable. Some may become hostile. The poverty identity predicts this and chooses the relational safety of remaining poor over the relational discomfort of becoming someone who is visibly moving toward increase. The old self fears losing belonging. Belonging is not a trivial need. The need to be connected to, accepted by, and recognized within a community is one of the most fundamental human needs there is. And the poverty identity has built its belonging within a community of shared limitation. To leave the limitation is, at some level, to risk leaving the belonging. And that risk is experienced by the deep self as an existential threat, more existential than the poverty itself. This is why the poverty agreement can persist in the presence of genuine desire for change. The desire for more is real. The fear of losing belonging is also real. And until the identity change reaches deep enough to address the belonging question, it will be subtly undermined by the self's drive toward relational safety. Calling smallness loyalty is the poverty agreement's response to the belonging threat. You remain small not because you have genuinely chosen smallness as a value, but because smallness is what keeps you connected to the people whose belonging you need. And you give the smallness the name of loyalty because loyalty is a genuine and important virtue. But loyalty to loved ones does not require you to recreate their poverty. It does not require you to inhabit their limitation as a form of honor. Genuine loyalty is expressed through love and connection and remembrance, not through ensuring that you also fail to thrive. The people who love you do not need you to remain poor in order to love you. Calling under receiving humility is the poverty agreement's response to the responsibility threat. You receive less than is appropriate, less than is offered, less than corresponds to the value of what you have contributed, and you call the under-receiving a form of spiritual virtue. But the source is not honored by your under-receiving. The supply that was sent through a channel and then deflected by your shame and false humility did not go back to the source to be redistributed more equitably. It simply did not arrive. The channel was not used. The delivery was refused. And the account reflects the refusal, while the poverty identity takes comfort in the story that the refusal was noble. Calling avoidance wisdom is the poverty agreement's deepest self-justification strategy. Every avoided opportunity, every room not entered, every offer not made, every talent not shown, every price not charged at full value is given the name of wisdom. I am being careful. I am being realistic. I am not setting myself up for disappointment. I am being responsible. The avoidance wears so many virtuous names that it becomes nearly invisible as the poverty agreement that it actually is. But wisdom that consistently lands on the side of smallness, that consistently produces poverty-consistent outcomes, that consistently finds reasons not to advance, is not wisdom. It is the false safety trap operating with full sophistication. The poverty agreement does not only prevent the arrival of new supply, it actively intercepts and returns supply that has already arrived. The delivery is made, the channel is open, the increase is real and present. And the poverty agreement meets it at the door and sends it back before it can fully enter. This is the mechanism of rejected delivery, and it operates through a very specific set of interior responses that arise precisely in the moment of potential receiving. I should not charge that much. The moment arrives when the full value of the work is clear and the number is before you. And instead of presenting it, the poverty agreement generates this sentence as an internal command. The should not is not a financial analysis. It is an identity judgment. It is the poverty state determining that the charge is inconsistent with the category to which the person belongs, and the charge is reduced before the client has even had the opportunity to respond. The delivery of appropriate financial recognition is rejected before arrival. People like me do not receive this. When an opportunity arrives that is genuinely large, genuinely aligned with the increase that the desire has been reaching for, the poverty agreement activates this sentence. It is the identity wall again. People like me is the poverty category. And what it is saying is not merely that the opportunity is outside previous experience. It is saying that the opportunity belongs to a different category of person, a category that the poverty-identified self is permanently excluded from. The receiving is blocked not by the opportunity's unavailability, but by the identity's refusal to accept delivery. I should not want more. This sentence arrives when the desire is close to being expressed, and the poverty agreement steps in with its moral override. The should not is a moral instruction. It is poverty identity using the language of virtue to prevent the natural desire for increase from completing its movement toward expression and request. You are being too greedy. You are being ungrateful for what you have. And the desire is suppressed. The request is withdrawn. The order to the source is cancelled by the poverty agreement before it can be clearly placed. This is too good for me. This is the poverty agreement's response to the moment when something genuinely aligned with the full life arrives and offers itself. A mentor who wants to invest time in you, a partnership that could genuinely change the scale of what is possible. A financial situation that is substantially better than what has been normal. The poverty agreement looks at the offer and generates this sentence as a form of protection. If it is too good for you, and you accept it, and it then fails or is withdrawn, the pain will be enormous. Better not to accept it, better not to believe it, better to return it before the heart is fully invested. The sentence is a preemptive protection against receiving. I will lose it anyway. This sentence activates the poverty agreement's expectation of loss, and it arrives most powerfully precisely when genuine increase is most near. The expectation of loss is not a prophecy, but it functions as one when it drives behavior that ensures the loss it predicts. If you believe you will lose it, you will not prepare for its arrival. You will not steward it carefully. You will not invest it in ways that allow it to grow. You will spend it quickly, because the expectation of its loss creates an urgency to benefit from it before it disappears. And the hasty, fear-driven handling of supply does indeed produce the loss that the expectation predicted. The poverty agreement confirms itself through the behavior it generates. Rich people are bad. This moral association is one of the most deeply embedded forms of rejected delivery. When the poverty agreement has morally contaminated the entire category of prosperity, any movement toward prosperity becomes a moral threat. Every door toward increase is also a door toward becoming something morally suspect. And the poverty identity, which may be deeply sincere in its desire to be a person of character, refuses to walk through doors that lead toward moral compromise. The rejection of delivery is experienced not as a poverty behavior, but as an ethical one. This makes it among the most difficult forms of the agreement to dissolve, because dissolving it feels like abandoning a moral position. My family never had this. Family inheritance, as a poverty agreement, operates differently from family loyalty. It is not about choosing to remain small in order to stay connected. It is about having genuinely absorbed the family's relationship to supply as a personal inheritance. The belief that the family's financial ceiling is your ceiling. That the maximum level of supply available to the family has been demonstrated through the family's history. That the historical record of what your family received is the record of what you are eligible to receive. This is not inheritance. It is a poverty agreement that uses the authority of family history as its evidence. The source is not constrained by family history. The supply available to you is not determined by the supply that reached the generation before you. I am safer staying small. This is the poverty agreement in its most transparent form. It names itself honestly. It says, the reason I am not moving toward increase is not that I do not want it or believe it is possible. It is that staying small feels safer, and safer is what the agreement values above all other things. The familiarity of the cell, the predictability of the poverty climate, the relational safety of the shared limitation, the protection of invisibility. All of these are safety, and the poverty agreement is, at its foundation, a safety agreement. A choice of the known over the unknown, of the familiar limitation over the unfamiliar increase. Naming it honestly, as the agreement names it here, is the beginning of the refusal. Fear is the poverty agreement's primary language, not the bold fear that announces itself clearly as terror, the quiet, reasonable, constantly present background fear that has been with you for so long that you can barely distinguish it from ordinary perception. The fear that is always slightly present in financial conversations, the fear that colors every decision involving money, the fear that is dressed in the language of caution, of realism, of prudence. The fear signal is always running, and the poverty agreement uses it as its operating system. Money never stays with me. This sentence and all the variations of it is a fear signal that has been elevated to the status of personal law. It is said with the authority of lived experience, and the lived experience is real. But the law that is drawn from it is not. Money never stays is not a description of how the universe operates in relation to you. It is a description of how the poverty agreement has been directing the use of money when it arrives. The agreement that says money never stays is the same agreement that ensures money does not stay, through the behaviors it drives at the moment when money is present. Name the sentence as a fear signal. Refuse to let it be the law. I am always behind. This fear signal operates as a posture, a constant orientation toward the deficit. It keeps the internal focus on the gap between where the supply is and where it needs to be. And a mind focused on the gap is a mind that is consistently dwelling on lack. The always is the key word. Always. Not currently experiencing a challenging period. Always behind. The always transforms a temporary condition into a permanent identity. And the identity of always being behind shapes perception, decision, and behavior in a way that ensures the production of conditions that confirm the always. Name the always as a fear signal. Remove the always from the sentence. I do not deserve more. Deserve is a very specific and very damaging concept in the poverty agreement. It places the question of supply inside a moral ledger, and the poverty-trained mind's ledger is always in deficit. There is always some reason why the full life has not been earned, why the maximum supply is not merited, why the complete provision is beyond what you have the right to receive. The source does not operate through a merit system in the way that deserving implies. The source supplies because it is the nature of the source to supply. Your eligibility for supply is not established by your performance on a moral ledger. It is established by your willingness to receive and your alignment with the state that allows supply to flow. Name the deserve question as a fear signal. If I get more, something bad will happen. This fear signal is the poverty agreement's insurance policy against receiving. It creates the expectation that increase is always accompanied by a corresponding loss or punishment, a superstition of prosperity, a belief that the universe is in balance in a narrow and vindictive way. For every good thing received, a comparable bad thing must be taken. This belief generates the anxiety that underlies the rejecting of delivery at the moment of its arrival. If more comes, disaster follows. Better to stay at the familiar level where the bad things are known and manageable. This is fear disguised as caution. Name it as the fear signal it is. I cannot handle success. This fear signal speaks to the responsibility fear that underlies the false safety trap. It anticipates the complexity of increase and judges the self incapable of navigating it. And in so doing, it ensures that the preparation for success is never made, which ensures that success, when it arrives, is indeed more difficult to handle than it would have been if preparation had been made. The poverty agreement's prediction confirms itself through the behavior it generates. The self that believes it cannot handle success will not prepare for success, will not develop the skills for managing increase, will not organize the life to receive more. And when more arrives, the unpreparedness appears to confirm the original fear. It is selfish to want wealth. This fear signal places the desire for prosperity in moral opposition to the welfare of others. It says that wanting more for yourself is, in some fundamental way, wanting it at someone else's expense. This belief may carry echoes of religious teaching about the dangers of greed, filtered through the poverty agreement into a prohibition against any desire for increase. But the certain way does not describe a competitive model of wealth. It describes a creative model. In a creative model, your increase does not diminish another's supply. Your prosperity does not come from the subtraction of someone else's. Wanting wealth is not selfishness in a system of infinite supply. Name this sentence as a fear signal. Replace it with the corrective. Poverty is no longer my identity. The correction practice begins with catching the poverty agreement, not hunting for it with anxiety, not monitoring every thought in a state of hypervigilance that would itself become a poverty climate behavior, simply noticing. When the poverty phrase arises, when the poverty thought forms, when the behavior consistent with the old identity appears. Notice it without judging it as evidence of failure. Notice it the way you would notice the temperature of the room cooling, calmly, clearly, as information, as something that can be corrected. Name it. Give it the precise name of the poverty agreement, rather than the virtuous name it has given itself. This is not caution. This is fear. This is not humility. This is under-receiving. This is not wisdom. This is avoidance. This is not realism. This is the poverty state confirming itself through my interpretation. This is not family loyalty. This is the inheritance of limitation. Name it accurately. The accurate name removes the virtuous cover and reveals the agreement beneath. Named correctly, the agreement loses the authority that the virtuous name was providing. A fear signal called caution has the authority of wisdom. A fear signal called fear has only the authority of what it actually is. Refuse it, not through suppression, not through a white-knuckled effort to think only approved thoughts. Refuse it with the authority of the command. I no longer agree with this. This is not my state. This belongs to the old identity, not the new one. The refusal is not performed for an audience. It is made in the interior, in the exact moment when the poverty agreement is presenting itself. The refusal is the act of withdrawing the internal agreement, one instance at a time. Each refusal is small. The accumulation of refusals is the state change. Replace with source identity. Do not leave the space where the poverty agreement used to be as empty space. Empty space is quickly reclaimed by the habitual thought that previously occupied it. Replace the poverty sentence with a sentence that belongs to the new identity. Not a hollow affirmation, a genuine, specific expression of the source identity as it applies to the exact poverty agreement that was just refused. Where there was, money never stays with me. Place. The source is my supply, and I am learning to receive and steward what flows to me. Where there was, I should not want more. Place. The desire within me is the source pressing toward fuller expression. Specific replacements carry more power than general ones. Take one action of increase. The replacement of the thought must be followed, wherever possible, by one concrete action that expresses the new state. The action does not have to be large. It has to be real. It has to be the behavior of the person who has refused the poverty agreement and is now acting from the new identity. After refusing the thought that says, "You should not charge that much," make the offer at the right price. After refusing the thought that says, "This is too good for me," say yes to the opportunity. After refusing the thought that says, "People like me do not ask," make the ask. The action is the state expressed in the world. It is the deepest form of the refusal. It changes not only what you think, but what you do. And what you do changes what you are. Repeat until the new state feels natural. This is the honest instruction about timeline. The correction practice is not a single intervention. It is a daily discipline of progressive, sustained state change. Each repetition of the practice, each catching, naming, refusing, replacing, and acting adds warmth to the interior climate. Each repetition deepens the new state. Each repetition makes the next repetition slightly more automatic, slightly less effortful, slightly more natural. The new state does not arrive fully formed on the first day of the practice. It forms the way climate forms, through the consistent, repeated application of the conditions that produce it. Repeat until natural. Natural is where the certain way becomes the default orientation. Natural is where poverty can no longer find an agreement to sustain it. You are not the sum of your financial history. You are not the product of your family's relationship to money. You are not defined by the number in the account, or the size of the income, or the height of the debt, or the length of the struggle. These things are real. Their reality is not in dispute, but their reality is the reality of effects, not causes. And effects do not define identity. Identity is what generates effects. You are the one in whom the state is changing. You are the one who is withdrawing agreement from the poverty condition that has been hosting itself in your interior life. That withdrawal is an identity act. It is the most fundamental financial act available to you. The statement that defines the new identity is not aspirational. It is declarative. I do not host poverty in thought, word, or action. Not, I am trying not to host poverty. Not, I hope one day to stop hosting poverty. I do not host it. The present tense is intentional. The declaration is made in the now, not in the future, not as a goal to be reached, but as a description of the person you are in the process of becoming through the practice that has been described. The declaration does not require the outer evidence to be in place before it is spoken. It precedes the evidence. It is the cause of which the evidence will be the effect. I am supplied by source. This is the second statement of the new financial identity. It is a statement about the origin of supply. Not, I am supplied by my job. Not, I am supplied by my clients. Not, I am supplied when the visible channels cooperate. I am supplied by source. The channels are many. The jobs, the clients, the opportunities, the unexpected provisions, the gifts, the collaborations, all of them are channels. None of them is the source. The source is the infinite supply behind all channels. And the identity of being supplied by source is an identity that does not collapse when one channel closes, because the source is not the channel. The source is the origin, and the origin is inexhaustible. I move as one who is increasing. This is the third statement of the new identity. The present tense again, not I will increase, not I am waiting to increase. I move, present motion toward increase. And this movement is expressed in the behavior of the person who holds this identity. They price from worth. They make offers from confidence. They receive without shame. They enter rooms without apology. They speak about the future without the habitual hedging of the poverty state. They act from the expectation of a person in the certain way, which means they act from a state that trusts the source, holds the vision, releases the how, and walks through the nearest door. This is the new identity in motion. The new financial identity does not require you to perform prosperity for an audience. It does not require you to pretend that the outer life has already fully conformed to the inner state. It does not require you to deny the ongoing reality of the current visible condition. It requires you to know which level of reality is the cause and which is the effect, and to operate from the cause even while the effect is still catching up. This is the mature spiritual understanding that underlies the certain way. Not pretense, not performance. A genuine understanding of the relationship between the state and the conditions it generates, and a deliberate daily choice to operate from the state that produces the conditions you are moving toward. The person who has entered the new financial identity is recognizable not by their current account balance, but by the quality of their inner posture towards supply. They do not speak poverty over themselves or their future. They do not shrink desire. They do not reject delivery. They do not call fear wisdom. They do not treat smallness as loyalty or under-receiving as humility or avoidance as discernment. They move. They offer. They receive. They act in the certain way, with the certainty that the source is real, that supply is infinite, that the channels will open in alignment with the state, and that the agreement with poverty has been dissolved at every level at which they have been able to find it. This is the new financial identity. This is who you are becoming. Everything you have received in this teaching rests on a single foundational principle. Poverty is not only a visible condition, it is also an internal agreement, and agreements can be broken. This is the truth that separates the certain way from every surface-level financial approach that has ever disappointed you. It goes deep enough to reach the layer where the condition is actually generated, the layer of the inner state, the inner agreement, the inner identity. And at that layer, the poverty agreement can be found, named, and refused. Poverty begins as agreement, not as a character flaw, not as a destiny, not as a moral verdict, as an agreement, an interpretation of experience, a conclusion drawn from prolonged exposure to visible lack, a decision made incrementally and mostly unconsciously that the limitation that has been present represents something permanent about the self and the self's relationship to supply. That agreement, once made, becomes the lens through which all subsequent experience is filtered, and the filter confirms the agreement at every rotation of the cycle. Agreement becomes identity. The temporary becomes permanent through the process of identification. The interpretation of experience that was once provisional becomes a name, a category, a description of essential self. And once poverty has become identity, every system that the identity governs begins to serve the poverty. Thought, speech, perception, decision, action, all of them are now operating from the poverty foundation. The identity is the foundation. The conditions are the structure. The structure can only be as stable as its foundation allows. Identity becomes behavior. This is the translation of inner state into outer action. The poverty identity produces poverty-consistent behaviors with the same reliability that a poverty climate produces poverty-consistent fruit, not because the person is incapable of better behavior, because the identity is the default from which behavior emerges, and the behavior is poverty consistent, undercharging, hiding talent, avoiding asking, rejecting opportunity, deflecting help, sabotaging increase, normalizing struggle, calling fear wisdom. Each behavior is the identity expressing itself in the world. Behavior recreates condition. The poverty-consistent behavior produces poverty-consistent results. The undercharged invoice produces an insufficient income. The hidden talent produces an absent opportunity. The avoided asking produces an unanswered need. The rejected opportunity produces a closed door. The deflected help produces an unmet challenge. And all of these results land as visible evidence in the life. The evidence is real. The bank account numbers are real. The closed doors are real. But they are the output of the identity, not the proof of permanent limitation. They are the effect of a cause. Change the cause. The state must change. And poverty leaves when no part of the self continues to welcome it. This is the completion of the arc. Not the state change in the abstract, not the desire to change. The actual, sustained, multi-layered withdrawal of agreement from the poverty condition at every level at which the self has been giving it permission to remain. When the thought refuses it, when the speech refuses it, when the perception opens to supply, when the decision serves increase, when the action expresses the new identity, when the identity declares clearly and consistently and without qualification that the source is the supply and that poverty can no longer find a home here. This is when poverty leaves, not because circumstances changed, because the agreement was broken. You are not condemned by the number that is currently in your account. You are not sentenced to the condition that has been most familiar. You are not the sum of every financial disappointment that has led to this moment. You are a person in whom the state is capable of changing, and a state change is not a minor event. It is the most profound and practically consequential transformation available to a human being in relation to their financial life. Because the state is the cause, everything else is the effect. Change the state, and you change the cause that generates the condition. This is not hope. This is the law. The struggle you have experienced is real. The difficulty is not being minimized. The pain of prolonged lack, of watching doors close, of working hard and seeing the results fall short, of feeling that the source has not heard, has not responded, has left you in the visible world to figure out what the invisible law is operating against you. That pain is being named here with full respect for its reality. The struggle was not your punishment. It was the output of a state. And the state was not your fault. It was the accumulated result of a long exposure to visible lack and a natural human process of drawing identity conclusions from that experience. But today, in this moment, the diagnosis has been given. The poverty agreement has been named. The mechanism has been revealed. The inner permission that has been allowing lack to remain, disguised as modesty and realism and loyalty and caution and wisdom, has been exposed. And exposure is the beginning of the end for any agreement that has required the protection of a disguise. You cannot continue to unknow what you now know about the inner structure of the poverty state, and that knowledge is not a burden. It is the entry point. You know where to begin. You begin with the state. The masters did not teach a shortcut. They taught a way. The certain way is not quick in the sense of bypassing the deep work, but it is certain in the sense that the law is reliable. When the inner state changes genuinely, when every layer of the self withdraws its agreement from poverty and aligns with the source and with increase, the outer life changes. Not on your timeline, not through the route you planned, but the direction of the life changes, and the direction is more important than the current position. You do not need to have arrived. You need to be genuinely moving. The state change is the movement. Begin it, deepen it, maintain it. You are not too late. The length of time that the poverty agreement has been in place is not the measure of how long it will take to dissolve. The dissolution can begin today. This teaching is not a course to be completed and then remembered. It is a transmission to be received and then applied daily, in the specific language of your specific poverty agreements, through the specific behaviors that your specific identity has been using to maintain the poverty climate. You know what those behaviors are now. You know the sentences. You know the fear signals. You know the rejected deliveries. You know the false safety trap. Knowing them is the power. Apply the correction practice and begin. The final encouragement of this teaching is this: the source has not given up on your life. The fact that you are here, listening to this teaching, taking it seriously, recognizing the poverty agreement in your own interior life, is itself evidence that the state is already beginning to shift. The state that has no movement toward the source would not be here. You are here because something in you is already refusing the poverty agreement at some level. What this teaching has done is give that refusal a name, a mechanism, a practice, and a law to stand on. The refusal was already in you. Now it has a certain way to follow. Follow it. For 7 days you are being invited into a daily practice of radical self-examination in the certain way. Each morning, before the day has had the chance to add new evidence to the old state, ask yourself one question. A question so direct and so specific that the poverty agreement will not be able to hide behind its virtuous disguises. The question is this: what thought, word, or action in me still agrees with poverty? Ask it seriously. Ask it the way a physician asks about symptoms, not to produce guilt, to produce precision, because you cannot correct an agreement that you have not located. Find it. Every day find one. When you have found the agreement for that day, whatever form it takes, whether it is a fear sentence that has been running automatically, a behavior that has been consistently consistent with the old identity, a deflection of receiving that occurred the previous day, a pricing decision that was made from the poverty state, a room that was avoided, a talent that was hidden, one more time, follow the correction practice. Name it accurately. Refuse it with the authority of the new identity. Replace it with a source identity statement specific to that particular agreement. And take one action of increase, however small, however incremental, that expresses the new state in the world. One thought corrected. One action of increase. 7 days. By the end of the 7 days, you will have found at least 7 specific agreements that have been maintaining the poverty state. You will have named them. You will have refused them. You will have replaced them with the identity of the source. And you will have expressed the new state in 7 concrete actions of increase. 7 is not the number of completeness. 7 is the beginning. The practice continues beyond the 7 days. But 7 days of this practice done sincerely will change something in the inner climate. The temperature will be measurably warmer at the end of the 7 days than at the beginning. Not because of the 7 alone, because 7 deliberate, specific, sincere acts of refusing the poverty agreement begin to establish the habit of refusal. And the habit of refusal is the practice of the new identity. At the end of the 7 days, come back to this teaching. Listen again and notice what you hear differently. Notice which sections land with new precision now that you have spent a week actively locating your own specific poverty agreements. Notice which fear signals you now recognize in yourself that you did not fully see before. The teaching deepens with each return because you are returning with a different inner state each time, and a different inner state hears different things in the same teaching. The masters knew this. They knew that truth is not a single depth well. It is an infinite depth, and the depth you reach depends on the state from which you are drawing. Come back. Go deeper. There is something you know right now that you did not know at the beginning of this teaching. You know the name of the agreement that has been allowing poverty to remain in your life even while the desire for increase was genuine. You know its disguises. You know its fear sentences. You know the forms it takes in thought, in speech, in behavior, in the deflection of delivery, in the false safety trap, in the rejected opportunity. And you know now that naming it is the first act of refusing it. So in the comments below, name the poverty agreement that you are breaking. Not in general terms, in the specific language of your own interior life. What agreement are you refusing today? Comment below and write the specific poverty agreement you are walking away from. It may be the sentence you have most often spoken about money. It may be the behavior that has most consistently leaked supply. It may be the fear signal that has been the loudest in your interior. Whatever it is, write it in the comments and then follow it with the declaration, "And I refuse it." The act of naming it publicly, even in the partial anonymity of a comment section, is an act of declaring the poverty agreement outside of yourself. When an agreement is named in the open, it loses the power that secrecy provided. Name it. Refuse it. Let the record stand. If this teaching has reached the layer where real transformation begins, where the diagnosis is not about strategy but about state, where the instruction is not about method but about identity, then you are watching the channel that was built for this exact depth of work. Sharing this teaching with someone you know who is living inside the poverty agreement, who has tried every surface-level approach and found that the condition returns, is one of the most genuinely useful things you can do with what you have received today. The masters did not keep the teaching for themselves. They gave it because the law works, and the law works for everyone who applies it sincerely. The teaching you received today began with a single disruptive claim. Poverty does not only live in a bank account, it also lives in the state. The condition you have been experiencing in the outer life is the output of an inner agreement that has been operating beneath every strategy, every effort, every genuine desire for change. You came into this teaching perhaps believing that the poverty in your life was a visible problem, requiring a visible solution. You are leaving this teaching with a different understanding. The problem is deeper, and the solution is also deeper. And the depth of the solution is what makes it real and permanent, and finally adequate to the condition you have been trying to change. You have received the diagnosis. You have received the mechanism. You have received the practice. You have received the challenge. The only question that remains is the one that each soul must answer for itself. Will you apply what you have received? Will you ask the daily question? Will you name the agreements? Will you refuse them one by one with the authority of an identity that is no longer willing to host poverty? Will you walk through the nearest door, take the one action of increase, speak the one new sentence, receive the one appropriate gift, make the one offer? The source is ready. The law is reliable. The certain way is open to you. When poverty can no longer find agreement in you, it begins losing its place around you. Not instantly, not dramatically. The way that cold leaves a room that has been consistently warmed, gradually, undeniably, and completely. First the deepest cold, then the medium cold, then the residual chill. Then one morning the room is warm and the warmth is normal, and the cold seems like it belonged to a different life entirely. That is the promise of the certain way, not overnight transformation, complete transformation. The kind that reaches every layer, the kind that makes poverty not just less frequent, but structurally impossible. Because the home it needed is no longer available. The agreement has been broken, and what was hosted in the state can no longer remain in the life.